Well, it's great to be with you. It was almost 10 years ago, maybe not quite, that I was in your seat. This was one of my favorite courses. I felt like getting a real take on business, but also life and kind of how the two intersect is helpful. Sometimes, maybe some of you are reaching the light at the end of the tunnel in your education and starting to think about whether you're going to join a young, early stage company like the one I'll describe, or even something later stage. The ability to innovate, kind of think about, be valuable to the company that you join or that you build is important, and I'm sure something y'all want. Just to get a sense of the group, how many of you are business majors by raise of hand? And how many are not? Okay, so it's almost a mix. And then how many are seniors? Okay, that's helpful. There are two things that I like to do. One of my favorite presenters, and it was mostly for his content, just seemed really engaging, but he would give away a book for every question asked. So I brought some of my favorite books. The box is a little tattered from Amazon, but the books are new. So if you ask a good question, I'll give you a book. I really don't want to just be up here talking. I hope that even if it's because of a bribe, that you'll engage in what we're talking about. I've also tried to simplify this, keep it something that you can digest and that gives us enough time to engage a little bit. But first, I think it's helpful to really take each experience we have and think about how those experiences, especially those that can be dramatic, how they help us frame what we do. I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to start businesses, to see some of those businesses succeed. I've had some of those fail, and it's not something that everybody in every country has the opportunity to do. A lot of my time, 175 days of last year, my wife and I were doing the math, I was in China, and it's a very different landscape. It's awesome. I love China. I love the people, the food, and just how everything seems to be growing at a scale that we just can't fully appreciate here in the U.S. But I also appreciate some of the things and liberties and freedoms we have here that other people don't enjoy. So I wanted to share this before I get going. This is September 10th, just recently. I was in Istanbul for a conference, and does anybody know what's going on in Istanbul right now or of late? What's that? Yeah, well, so Arab Spring kind of extends. Here's a book. Thank you. Arab Spring is kind of going on in the region. What is Arab Spring? What does that kind of mean? Does anybody know? Yeah, so you have a push for democracy, and people want to enjoy certain freedoms that they see, and now through social media and otherwise that maybe they weren't as aware of or as sort of had the gumption to go after. Specifically in Istanbul, what was going on was it straddles Asia and Europe. It's not really the Middle East, but it's 90% Muslim. And the current government is pushing toward more conservative. So certain things like advertising alcohol, they've done away with, and they're sort of taking a country that's been for a time now more liberal to conservative, and you get pushback from people. So they were going to raise this park called Gezi Park, totally take it down and put in a government building. People stood in front of it to protest, and since then there's been these riots, really confrontation between police and the people. So I was there, just get done with a meeting. My buddy says, hey, I got to take you to try a wet burger. I guess it's sort of a kind of local hamburger on the street. It was really good. We're eating it. All of a sudden we hear these two blasts. And he goes, and I'm like, what is it? He goes, that's tear gas. So we walk out, and imagine sort of this corridor, and it's this area. You can't really see it. I think with the video you'll be able to see it. We see the tear gas coming, and all of a sudden a stampede of people fleeing from the tear gas, right? How do you think I felt? First time in Istanbul, in Turkey for that matter. Little hesitant, right? A little concerned. So I just wanted to share quickly this, and I'll get to the point, and we'll really dive into things. You don't have audio, but these are all right after all the police coming in. So everybody there's a police officer. They've got the full-on gear, bulletproof vests, gas masks, shields to hold people back. And they're all approaching. And by the end of it, there's about 600 police officers. So you kind of go around. This was the corridor where people were running through. And this was interesting, something that kind of makes you think. But then what was more was we kind of went through that evening, and then the next day is what? September 11th, right? So I wake up and I'm starting to see on Facebook and everywhere everybody posting the same things you all saw, right? I'm reminiscing like we all can of where we were that day, what we were doing, and it's pretty vivid for most of us. And the two side by side, that evening seeing people very physically and in direct confrontation sort of fighting for and making their voice heard for their freedoms, then the next day sort of appreciating some of our own freedoms, it was powerful. I feel like what you have here and everything I'll talk about today, it may be interesting. I hope it's a little interesting, but I also think that you have so much today, and that was hard for me always to see as a student. I think I got it most of the time, but you have like everything that's really valuable today, and there's something in us that should muster up that gratitude for what we have. That said, this is certainly a springboard into my journey, and what I view as being just very fortunate. I never thought of myself as one who would go on and take this path. You hear people talk about themselves as serial entrepreneurs. Technically, you could say, I've done several, maybe I am, but I don't think of that. I'm not. I like to find opportunity, but my path as a kid, I grew up relatively poor, was I'm going to go the professional path. I always had straight A's. I was on the pre-med path at BYU, was a business major just because I wanted to differentiate myself from all of the science majors who were going to med school or thinking they were going to med school. That turned into an internship that caught my attention. I saw people making a lot of money, and I thought I can do that. And so one thing led to another. What I'm going to share about today is my journey with Zinch, kind of where it started, and I broke it up into these 4 areas. So the idea, the chutzpah, which we'll talk about, the people, and the reward. And really, what I want to talk about is not just, take it for what it is, which is one man's take on this particular experience, but also what rang true for me, what seemed to work, and what did not. I think sometimes you're in these and there's the risk of looking at entrepreneurship and starting a business and thinking there's a set path. And there are great books, and I'll share some with you today that talk about the path and things that you should learn from what other people's mistakes. But there's also just a little bit of serendipity in all of it and a lot of hard work. I think does anybody know what that word means? Yeah, audacity, moxie, cojones, if you're a Spanish speaker, right? This is kind of that sort of, you've got some chutzpah, right? Okay, so I think I got these two misordered in the slides, but we'll get to it. So first, the idea. Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. So the first one was The Millionaire Mind. That was actually a book given to me by the guy who lectured me 10 years ago. It's fabulous because it sort of dispels some of the myths about millionaires. You think it's the person who drives a nice car, but there's actually, it's quite surprising who actually has money and wealth. And then the second one was Linchpin by Seth Godin. So has anybody read Seth Godin's stuff before? Yeah, he's great. And this one is a notion of a linchpin within a company. Like, what is that kind of person that holds things together and is sort of a critical piece to your team? Good point. So the idea. So Zinch really started from an experience. And I'll talk about this when I sort of think about how do ideas come about. I think a common question to an entrepreneur is, how did you come up with the idea? Or how do I come up with a good idea? And I don't know. I think they just come on you, right? Like sometimes, does anybody get ideas in the shower? I get ideas in the shower sometimes. Maybe there's other places, you just kind of, that's where all of a sudden it clicks, right? It's not necessarily in a designated setting where the temperature's right and you have 10 ideas in front of you and you're figuring out which one's the best one. With Zinch, what happened was there were a few people involved, so me and 2 friends. One, we served missions together, we roomed together, and we started our first businesses together. In the course of things, we were both basketball players. We played pickup ball, church ball. We were living in Detroit. There was a young man that we befriended, played church ball with, super talented. Also, as chance would have it, he lived in a rough city. His brother was in prison for crack. The house next door to him was burnt to the ground. And if you were just sort of to look from the outside, you would say, what are his chances of getting his girlfriend pregnant? High. What are his chances of finishing high school? Low. What are his chances of going to college? Super low. But amid all of that, you just see this like beaming, like has that glow. How many have served missions? Probably a lot, right? don't have to have served a mission to have met wonderful people, but you are in a setting on a mission where you see this. We weren't on a mission at the time, but you just see that enormous amount of potential, that drive, and you kind of say, you know what, with a little bit of guidance, I bet he would do awesome things. And so we got involved and helped him in his college application process. He ended up coming from Detroit to UVU. I remember getting the call one day where he's like, this place, I am the only black person in this whole school. And this is scary, like everybody's looking at me. I mean, he was like frozen, right? And I'm like, calm down, take some breaths, sit down for a minute, you'll be okay. But so we're going through that experience, we noticed that process of applying to college, especially for somebody who didn't have parents who'd gone to college, or a counselor in their high school who could coach them through this, it was kind of intimidating. Does anybody know how many universities are in this country? How many? Yeah, if you count community colleges and everything else. At the undergrad, so a school like BYU, there's 2,100. That's a lot. The UK, for example, has a little over 100. Right? So we have to first-generation kids and many who live in this country, to international students who don't live in this country, it is intimidating. Right? You kind of, if you're like me, you apply to a few schools you've heard of or that you live by, and maybe Harvard and Yale or something. But for most people, like understanding all of it, it's like a lexicon, to figure it out. So, and at the same time, those colleges say things like, we want to recruit more diversity, more first-generation students, right? The very person that we were helping. So we looked at that and we said, how is this so hard? How is it that I could connect with you on Facebook and we could immediately have a feel for each other? Like I could look at a few pictures and some of your posts and I'm like, oh, I kind of get a sense for who you are. The ability to connect these days through a profile is just made so much easier. So we looked at that and we wanted to apply that same thing to college admission, was present yourself professionally, kind of in a LinkedIn type of way, to colleges in a way that they can now say, we want to recruit African-American males from Detroit who want to study in the West, right? And we can help schools do that. So now we work with many, many schools in the United States to help them recruit, and many students use our site to find schools.
So how different was that from your original idea? Like how much of it?
Totally shifted, yeah. So that's a great segue into the next one. This is actually one I haven't read yet. Most of them I've read. This is one that I heard is, it was highly recommended by a friend. It's called StrengthsFinder 2.0. I can't tell you anything about that book, but I'm going to read it too. Question in the back?
So you had this idea that, you said you have ideas all the time, like in the shower or whatever. What made this idea something that you decided you wanted to act on, you wanted to do something about, where all the other ideas just kind of let them slide?
Yeah, so that goes into this. So what rang true in terms of coming up with or latching onto that idea? And I think it's a few things. I mean, one, it was, so you mentioned like what made this idea different than others, right? I call it's just my own way of thinking of it as sort of captured passion, like something that in that moment clicks, right? Something that you have a little bit of like intensity for, like you've got to be willing to get in an argument over certain things we all are real passionate about, right? Maybe it's some social issue, right? Maybe we, I won't go into those, but I'm sure we all have certain social issues or other issues that were really kind of, they hit home. We had a friend who, mental illness, for example, for me, like, I've had family members who struggle with mental illness, so I'll get in a discussion about that and I'll get heated about it. I think of that as like captured passion, the right sort of time and coming together of something that makes your heart thump a little bit. But then it's also intentional bandwidth, another, just how I think of it, meaning you can have an idea and there's a lot of people who will come with ideas and then they're sort of like, or for a project you'll have at school, you'll have the business plan, you'll work through a business plan, but then you graduate and you go on and you're not creating intentional time in your day to really see that thing through. So you have to, in a very cognizant way, say, I'm going to break away from what I'm currently doing. I'm going to, burn the boats in sort of the Cortez way, and I'm here to stay. I'm here to figure this thing out, right? That has to happen. The other thing we found was that, I put it here, is questioning the status quo is always healthy, even if you come back to accepting it. Like, it's worthwhile to look right now and say, what industries have been disrupted? Communication, right, is a big one. The way we communicate, technology has like changed it. Like the ability to purchase things. I bought all these books from Amazon, right? Like my ability to just buy books like has changed dramatically. education and healthcare were two big ones for us that were like, they're bad. Like if you've been through that process, you tell me as a student, right? Does anything right now in education, does it have you in mind? Your courses, like are they scheduled necessarily? Have you ever had the problem where a course wasn't available when you wanted it? Does anybody have that problem? Probably everybody, right? Have you ever had and the books, do you have any, how are books and just content, who comes up with that? Who decides that? Not you, it doesn't always help you. Like the whole timing, distribution, everything in education, in this case, finding the right schools, it never seemed to us to revolve around the student. It served a lot of other people, publishers, professors, administration at a university. So challenging that and questioning that, we found was good. And in some cases, you're going to come back to where you started and say, you know what, it's fine, or we can't tackle this, or we're not willing to tackle it. But questioning the status quo is healthy. The next one is your point, which is, did the idea change? Absolutely. So, ideas are fluid, right? Sometimes you'll come back to where you started. In our case, we found that China is a good example. So I launched this site in the US. We grew it. It had done well. We launched it in China. The first iteration was taking our US site and translating it to Chinese. How do you think that did in China?
What made you choose to, I guess, launch it in China out of like all the countries? Did you serve your mission there, or
Yeah.
no Chinese, or what?
Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, good book. Good question. So, why do you think we took it to China and not Brazil?
One, they have the largest population in the world.
Okay.
Two, a lot of them want to come to the U.S. and study.
That's right. That's right. So from like 1995 to 2001, you had steady growth of students coming from China to the U.S., but most of them were graduate students funded by their government. From 2000, post 9/11 to like 2005, because of the U.S.'s visa policy, very few people could get to this country without like serious challenge. Rightfully so, right? We were kind of leery of, and we wanted to make sure we knew who was coming in here because we had just been attacked. Since 2006, China has been on a crazy, you've read it, pick your magazine, right? Not only is their economy on fire and has been, it's just this powerful engine, but because of that, they're sending huge numbers of students to the US. So it's grown by at least 20% for the last 6 years. Currently, we have 175,000 Chinese students studying in the US. Every year at the undergraduate level, there are 20,000 new Chinese that come here. For schools like Michigan State, 25% of their undergrads are Chinese. 25% of all. 1 out of every 4 kids is Chinese, right? These kids are all, most of them are full pay, right? They can afford the $50,000 a year tuition, which that's another thing with BYU. We're super lucky here. The quality of education you get for the cost is unbelievable. So, long way of saying, China was a big target. I happen to speak Chinese, but I think we would have entered China regardless of that because I served a mission in Taiwan. Yeah.
How do they afford that tuition, $50,000? Because their income per person in China is quite low.
That's right.
Is that part into, I guess, is that what part of the Zinch helps with, is finding people that?
Yeah, really good question. So part of the dynamic there is, if you look at this room, I'm sure there's some here who grew up under more humble circumstances and some who are wealthy, right? The 4-Hour Work Week, a great book. Don't think you actually ever have a 4-hour work week. That's a misnomer, but there's some good principles in there. Or at least I haven't figured it out. But the disparity in the US is so different, right? You have a huge middle class. You do have wealthy elite. Guess China is very different, right? For every one person who can afford to come here to study, there's 100,000 plus living in peasant-like conditions. So the difference is China has had less of a middle class. Like many countries, like right now, if you look at Russia, and since the breakup, like you have all these oligarchs, and you have huge wealth at the upper crust, like ridiculous yacht, Bentley, money ain't a thing for them type of thing. But then you have a huge amount of poverty. In China, the beauty is that China has done away with poverty greater than, if you look just statistically, greater than any other cause out there. Like just because they've raised the quality of life in their own country, they've taken millions from poverty to now having something. That's why things are going so well, and people, relatively speaking, are happy with the government or the powers that be. You still, though, you have at that upper crust just extraordinary wealth, and because it's so big and it's that alone is enough. So in the city I lived in, Beijing, there were 150,000 reported people who had at least a net worth of $1 million. 150 households that were millionaires, just in Beijing, right? Yeah, so most students, it's not to say there aren't a huge population of students who would love to come to the US and study and just can't afford it. There are, but for those who can't afford it, that number is really big too. Yep. There were a couple other questions?
Yeah, so dealing with the idea, the original idea, were you looking for some sort of opportunity in education specifically, or was that just kind of what came to you?
That's what came, yeah. Some people in the space of edutech, which is big right now, there's a lot of innovation. Has anyone heard of Khan Academy, right? Linda, a lot of great ways and the ability to access education or MOOCs, that are happening, whether it's Coursera, or others. Some people say I'm passionate about education. I think that's stupid. Who's not passionate about education? Like, yeah, we all want to learn. Like, so I don't have something specific to education that sort of gets me going, but I do have something about opportunity, right? I do have something about, my own experience with, which I shared, that sort of made me look at it and say, gosh, there's got to be a chance to improve this process.
So when you guys are like creating a profile, or when someone creates a profile to find a scholarship or a grant or something like that on the website,
Yeah.
someone that's from a different country or someone that's from an ethnic race that might be a minority, generally universities will be more accepting and willing to give money to those people. How do you do that? I mean, how do you guys find a way to make it work for if you have like the white male from California whose dad has money but he says he has to pay for his own schooling? I mean, how do you get around that?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the reality is the white male whose dad has money and probably he could be a legacy student at a certain school. It's not to say those kids aren't still going there. Like if you look at most campuses, that's still happening. I mean, I think there is an overarching theme of being different in a good way, having a passion. So as I'm told by like folks at Stanford, we work with Stanford, and I've talked to a lot of their admissions staff, and they'll say, these days we're not just looking for the well-rounded kid. Everybody thinks they have to be involved in everything, have their hands in this. You're in the Spanish club, you're in the chemistry club, you're in the ski club, you're National Honor Society. You take all these. I mean, they say. His point to me was, we want a well-rounded student body with individuals who are extremely passionate about certain things. So another admissions, a dean of admissions said, he had a story one year of a girl who did a, what's it called when you smash cars into each other? Demolition derby that she did every year with her dad. So she went through the process of sort of outfitting a car to go enter a demolition derby, and she wrote about this in her essay, and it sort of struck her as like, wow, that's a, she had real initiative. It was something special with her dad. It kind of crafted her as a person. So I think whether it's your identity and your background, which you just inherited, is unique, which can give you an advantage in some cases, or you've, of your own accord, sort of went out and created your own path and found certain things that you've just had a passion for. I mean, I think you can approach it from different angles. And we certainly think that our site, I mean, we had an end in mind for one individual, but we, millions, 40% of all high school students use our site now. So guaranteed in there's huge populations of girls and guys and of all different colors and sizes and shapes, right? So I mean, I think the point is we wanted to give students a canvas to show what was unique about them. Yeah. Then you definitely get a book.
What's your competitive advantage on that?
Yeah, good question. So, and the book I'm giving you, I actually read with my team in China. They make that book in Chinese. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Scott Peterson actually recommended it to me a couple years ago, maybe a year ago when I was speaking here. But so our competitive advantage in China is that you're probably familiar with education agents like Xindongfang or kind of take your pick, right? So what's unique to us in China and the way we approach the market is we came in and we said, look, we have real relationships with hundreds of US universities. We know what they want. We're going to provide you authentic information for you to decide for yourself, and it's free to you as a kid. So because of that, we're trusted in China. We've completely localized the site. It's not only in your language, but we've done things like we allow you to search schools based on TOEFL score, which for this guy, his English is pretty good. But for a lot of kids in China, right, if your English suffers, you probably want to find a school that offers intensive English, right, for a year or so. Your English is really good, but most Chinese students, that's a real challenge. That's a big barrier. So it was authenticity and then customizing it to them. Just to keep a little bit with the pace, I do want to jump, and I had put these in the wrong order, so I'm actually going to go to this first. How much time do I have, though, Steve? Just to be about 10 minutes. Okay, great. So let's jump into a couple of these, and then along the way I'll take a question for each section and one at the end, and I have 4 books left, so that's perfect. So the chutzpah here for me, I think I've found, again in my journey, is that this was a critical piece. When you ask what's the most important aspect, it's important to me, and what I'm sharing here is a picture of my kids. So this is my oldest, Coy, and this is Case. This is July 4th. We live in Provo. We go down. My office is right downtown, so we'll kind of camp out there. We had some waffles this year. And then I take them down, and nothing makes me get more excited or feel more proud than what's going on here. So before it, we go and we buy some Otter Pops, right? They get out and sell. And the whole thing is, the first year we did this, they were super timid, right? You talk about it like, yeah, we're going to sell Otter Pops, and then you get out there, and how do you feel? You want to wet your pants, right? You're nervous. The thought of getting in front of people and walking. So, but that's important, right? I want my kids to understand, getting comfortable on the stage and with people, and saying Otter Pops for sale is a good thing. So they go out and they hold those signs, and I don't help them. I stand from a distance, but so he was the one barking out this year, Otter Pops for sale, Otter Pops for sale, and she was the one kind of, directing them through the crowds and stuff. And this year we sold out in record time. Last year we had a lot. Last year, if you remember, the 4th was actually quite cooler. So I don't think ice cream or Otter Pops were as much in demand. But this year it was great. That ability, at any stage of your business to sort of be unafraid to face the critics, to sort of get up when things don't go well in your business. I remember we just rehired a guy who we had to let go 5 years ago. I remember sitting in front of Gurus in downtown Provo, and I was like, man, I'm sorry, we haven't managed the business right, and we've got to let you go. And it sucked. I mean, I hated that feeling, because you see the person, you probably know their spouse, if they have kids, and you just feel responsible. And it's a wonderful part of starting a business, but it's also a painful part when it doesn't go right. So just a couple anecdotes there. I remember my MTC branch president, he would like to say that, when we were reading about Moses, he would say, I gotta believe that when he parted the Red Sea, that he was up to his neck in the water. And I've always loved that image of, not only, he didn't just go and kind of command it, he went out and he was up to his neck in the Red Sea. I don't know if that's how it happened. I'm not sharing false doctrine. I'm just, that idea of he's all in, that you've got to believe in a miracle if you're going to have any level of miracle happen in your business. Okay? The other one, and I'll get to your question, is my college coach. So I played ball at the U of U. I ended up transferring from Mission to here, and I graduated from here, and I was rooting for BYU last weekend. But I played ball at the U, and Rick Majerus was my coach. And I remember, he would always say, I can't quite do his voice, but he would always say, I want to see heirs of commission. And he would always call it commission. He wouldn't say omission or commission. But heirs of commission versus omission, right? That you got to test stuff out. You got to be unafraid to fail, and you will fail, rather than sort of holding back. That was absolutely the case I found. And when I think of chutzpah, that's being able to put yourself out there. The last, we don't have enough time, so I'm not going to get into that. Some of was not the case was that startups have the smartest people. Absolutely not. I got good grades, but at BYU I was mediocre. I think 3.72 or something, and I didn't take the hardest courses necessarily. Successful startups have the most experienced people. Absolutely not the case. Great to have experience. When I'm doing my next startup, I'll probably look at, and that's an important piece to it. And the mentors we had absolutely had experience. The reality was we were relatively unexperienced, and that was just what it was. The other thing was, being your own boss is greater work and life balance and more time, and people will think that entrepreneurs is like some walk in the park. I think I would have an easier path if I had done med school and other things. In other words, the grass isn't necessarily greener in terms of the effort that it takes and that you have to put into something to give it some lift. Question, and then we'll jump to the next piece, and we're probably getting close. This is the
Work up the chutzpah to start a business.
chutzpah.
Chutzpah to start. Is there kind of a point of no return that you can kind of reach where once you do this
I don't understand that. Say that again.
So, so it's really hard to like start selling the products.
Yeah.
Is there a point where like maybe once you bought them, it's easy to just go out and sell them, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, once you see, so for example, with us, like I remember the day we were watching our website, and all of a sudden we were having like tens, maybe hundreds of people a day, and then I remember the first day we had like 6,000 people register, and we were like thinking we were Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. We were just like jumping around. Then we're like, well, how are we going to make some money? So then I remember when we first had a school commit to us. I remember being in California, and there was a school that committed to this idea. With each one of those steps, you kind of build up, and all of a sudden, like, you're viewing yourself in the mirror, and you look a little stronger and more confident, right? Like, absolutely, you're going out there, and you're kind of, Steve Young calls it like you fake it till you make it. But at some point, you start making it. You start like hitting some of your receivers and actually validating and being able to look back and say, yeah, like I've done it. Like, and so the disbelief or the little disbelief that creeps in, it's just easier to sort of smack it aside. Let's go back. Quickly, because we're, I think, almost out of time. Is that right, Steve? Okay. So, the next one is, the people. This is, let me just give you a snapshot. This is our first group in Provo, Utah. We're out here. We then relocated the office to actually San Francisco, and this is a group from San Francisco. And then this is the team in Beijing. At each level, like, the people behind this, that's what makes it so exciting. That's the reason I've enjoyed being at this so long. I've never done anything so long other than marriage, which is another great thing. But I've been doing this, 8 years, and I love it for that reason. Like, finding people smarter than you, finding people that really believe in this, and that will, the day where you're sort of like, wow, that woman or this man, like, they care about this as much or more than me, like, is a gratifying feeling, right? Because early on, it's just you. Like, you have to believe in it more than anyone else. Because of time, I'm not going to go through all these. I think the one thing I would say is, one thing I found is not the case is that life slows down for your startup. You still have, ideally, it's like, there's no more kids that enter the picture. It's like everything's just really peaceful. The reality is you have kids. If you're LDS, you have callings that are demanding. You have death, and challenges, that come, and all of those happened in these 8 years for my startup. And I would say, like, it just makes it tricky. You never hit that point of sort of, you're out in the pasture and it's just easy grazing. I've found that it's continues to be a lot of uphill. You have, definitely your downhill strides that you hit, but it's a lot of tough work. There was a question. I've got a couple more books to give away before we wrap up.
Yeah, well, I was curious to know about selling your product. I hear in all my classes, like, selling is what it's all about.
That's what built our business. Yeah, our business was not built on. So, what is your question? Just tell me about the role of selling in your company.
Yeah, that, like, when you can get any insights you can give on that, but really, what made it that you could sell it? Like, what advice would you give to other people that want to sell their products as well?
Two things. It's got to be an idea that you really believe in. Like, you've got to be, there will be some things that come up. And I get that some people can look at their juice and say, like, this is a special juice, and I really believe that it'll cure cancer. But at the end of the, you have to have enough validation where, like, okay, this is pretty rock solid. Not to discount anybody who sells juice, or if your parents have made a lot of money selling juice, I think it's fine. I'm just saying, so it's got to be something you really can get behind. But the second part is there is a craft to selling. The notion of, like, salesy and a used car salesman. I think sales is they're the most well-compensated people in the company because it's the most important piece. Like, aside from some of the Twitters of the world, which are rare, most businesses have to figure out how to make money, and that means somebody has to be selling something. I'm biased. My background is in sales. It's what built this. Because you're always selling an investor in your idea, selling your first customers, selling somebody to join your company when you have, like, nothing that you're going from, and they're willing to leave a high-paying job for it. All right. And we're going to wrap it up. Like, I want to be respectful of time. The last one, oh, whoops, we're going the wrong way. The last one was, maybe we covered it. Did we? The reward. One last comment. Steve, is that okay about the reward?
Yep. 30 seconds.
Okay, awesome. What I'd say is, when you have 7 figures in your bank account, there's no instant happiness that comes from it, because I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it's like to have that. Okay, so I would unequivocally say, that some of the happiest times of my life is like me and my wife, studio apartment, $460 a month, can barely make our rent, and our, I put on here junior bacon cheese. When we first started the first one, like all I could afford that was when like the dollar menu came out, and being able to eat a lunch for $3, 3 junior bacon cheese, like it was like glorious for me. So, I can afford more now, but my ability to find happiness is not made necessarily any easier. And that's where I would come back to where I started, which is I feel like you have it all today. Maybe you have a startup, maybe you make money and some of these other things, but the reward in all of it are some of the things that you're taught about, fortunately for you, on a regular basis here at BYU.